Yeah, thanks for coming on to chat with us today. We're excited to speak with you. So just to sort of set the table for people who aren't familiar with you and your campaign, you're running for the Senate in Louisiana, and your primary race will take place on the day of the presidential general election, November 3rd. And I
That's
wondered
right.
if you could just tell people a little bit about the jungle style primary in Louisiana. If I'm not mistaken, it's unique to the state. You have if nobody reaches the 51% majority, there's another election in December.
Yes, that's exactly how it works. So we're one of the few states in the country that has a primary election that's a jungle primary, and that every candidate that's running for office runs against each other. And I mean, running for that particular office runs against each other. And if no one makes 51%, then there's a runoff in December. So that's just kind of.
And has it always been the case in Louisiana?
No, it hasn't always been the case. I think Louisiana switched to a jungle primary somewhere around the 80s, the early
Okay.
80s. Yeah, maybe late 70s, early 80s.
Do you know what the motivation behind that would have been?
Well, it's a power grab, really. I think at the time, well, still, a lot of people think that Louisiana is the deep red state. We actually aren't. There are more registered Democrats here than there are Republicans. There's about 2 million registered Democrats and only under 1 million registered Republicans. So for a long time, Democrats kind of ran this state. So they switched to a jungle primary to make it easier for Democrats to win these elections. But it's backfired now because their demographics have switched significantly. But I think it was a power grab. I think is a lot of the motivation.
That makes sense.
That's a really interesting system of doing primaries. And of course, the Republican incumbent in this race is Senator Bill Cassidy. I'm really interested in hearing about, in your estimation, how the voters in Louisiana have been responding to Donald Trump's job performance lately. As president, overseeing this whole COVID-19 pandemic, especially with the recent crazy spikes in cases. Have you noticed a dissatisfaction among Louisianans, and are you hoping to tie your candidacy to that potential dissatisfaction?
Most definitely. There's definitely been a general dissatisfaction. I mean, Donald Trump's poll numbers are tanking, and I think that anyone connected to him will also reap that type of response, especially if they continue to support him and defend him despite the clear mistakes that he's making or the clear poor decision making that he has exhibited. So absolutely, here in Louisiana, we've seen a huge response to the need for change and support of our campaign. Even nationally, of course, Andrew Yang endorsed our campaign, his group, Humanity Forward. So we're one of the first grassroots campaigns in our state's history to receive a national endorsement without having raised millions and millions of dollars. So it's an interesting dynamic here. But yes, I think people are just ready for change in general.
Before we get too far into the weeds, could you just tell us a little bit about why you decided to run for Senate and what kind of a message that you want to deliver to the people of Louisiana?
Well, I decided to run for U.S. Senate because there was no one in the U.S. Senate other than the one Democrat we have in Congress, Cedric Richmond, that was speaking the language of my community. We traveled all across the state talking to people, and people felt disenfranchised. People have been disengaged because they don't see a government that works for them. They don't see a community that works for them. And I mean, a community in Congress, I should say, that works for them. So people want change. And I decided to step up and be a part of that change. People are losing their jobs by the millions now. People are suffering right now. And we need voices that understand that we don't need the tone deaf people that are in Congress right now, particularly those that are representing our state. It's time for change, and I decided to step up and be a part of it. So that's why I decided to run for U.S. Senate. I knew last year when I decided, even before the presidential impeachment cover-up, and even before the bungled handling of COVID, that this was something I wanted to do because I knew that Bill Cassidy had failed us. When I confronted him in 2017 at a town hall about his vote to repeal the ACA without a replacement, I knew that he was no longer listening to the American people. He was no longer listening to his constituents, many of which rely on the ACA for healthcare coverage. So I stepped up because I had no choice. I had to do this. This was something that I did it out of necessity, and I'm just encouraged because of the groundswell of support that we received so far. And we still have 5 or 6 months before the election, but the momentum is building here, and I'm excited about it.
Well, yeah, we've heard a lot about, the Democrats potentially flipping the Senate coming in November, which is something that was, pretty unheard of maybe a year or two ago. But, these last couple of months have just really exposed the GOP as a party that has no business running a country, let alone during a national emergency. It seems like now people are hopefully waking up to that reality. And a lot of these senators and Republicans will be voted out, including the president himself. That being said, it seems like with what you've said about the amount of Democrats versus Republican voters in the state of Louisiana, your race would be a pretty obvious one to invest resources in. Has the Democratic Party been supportive of your senatorial bid, or do you think they're going to, try to back a more corporate candidate or stay out?
I think they'll stay out, if anything. So I've been paying attention to a lot of the campaigns across the state. Charles Booker, of course, because this primary has kind of risen so high above the fray as far as, the investment of the DNC as opposed to a grassroots candidate kind of, pulling from other places. I think that the national Democratic apparatus has written off the southern states as unwinnable. Because they've just decided that we can concede those states and go after more states that are easily flippable. They've decided that Democrats can't win, particularly African American Democrats can't win in states here in the South. But I think they're 100% wrong. Just because we've always done something a certain way doesn't mean that we should continue doing something a certain way. And I think that we have to look at who's making the decisions there. Are these very conservative centrist Democrats? Are these people that have an ear to the ground that understand what's really happening across this country, particularly here in the South? So I don't think that they'll get involved at all. I don't think any of the Southern candidates are going to get any national help, unfortunately, which, our campaign strategy was not inclusive of their support anyway. But I would hope that they would step forward and see the value in a campaign like ours. But, our strategy was always to do the groundwork first and to get the people behind us and to make sure that those elements are in place so that if we do get some national support from the Democratic Party, it's just lagniappe and it's not something we need. So that's always been our strategy. And I think I can speak for most of the candidates here in the South. We saw what happened in Charles Booker's case. I mean, if it wasn't for Mike Brower and the support of the DNC, Charles Booker would have won, period. And this is coming from a grassroots candidate who did all the legwork on the ground. So we know that Black candidates can win here. We know that Black candidates can win on the ground. It's just about having the belief system and the proper support from those apparatus that can help them to be successful. So. Do
you think that comes from the fact that the Democratic Party is just not really that interested in hearing the perspectives of the people from the South? They've kind of been abandoned by the party leadership over the past couple of decades. It kind of recalls Thomas Frank's best-selling book, What's the Matter with Kansas? We kind of saw this post-2000s shift after the Democrats essentially abandoned the working class on issues like trade, supporting measures like NAFTA under Clinton and later TPP. I wonder if you could talk to us about how trade has impacted your region, and I wondered if that's a big motivator and maybe why a lot of people in Louisiana opted for Trump.
Well, I don't know if that's why they opted for Trump here in Louisiana, because if you look at, first of all, Louisiana is almost a central point for trade in the world. We're right here on the Gulf Coast, and a lot of our products here, the agricultural, the metals, the fisheries, all those things we trade internationally. So Trump's tariffs have really destroyed our economy here in our state. We saw multiple businesses that had built what I would consider to be kind of empires fold under these tariffs because they were so detrimental to the trades here, what we produce here. So I don't know now. I mean, I guess maybe they were like, well.
Sure, yeah, he sort of ran against the exact opposite of what he ended up doing, which was overhauling trade and just decimating the working class. Absolutely.
So, I mean, we have the fossil fuel industry here, which is, we have Exxon and some of the BP, some of the other fossil fuel industries here that have been greatly impacted by these tariffs. So I think those people, if they vote for Donald Trump again, it won't be because he's doing such a great job for their jobs. I don't even want to get into what their other motivators are, but hey, it's the Deep South. You figure it out. You know what it's about. So I can understand. I'm not going to excuse it. I cannot understand why the national parties, because these are easily winnable states. And I'll show you why we're not the red state that people believe we are. First, before Bill Cassidy won this seat, Mary Landrieu, who's a Democrat, was sitting there. We're one of two states, I believe, here in the South that has a Democratic governor who's on his second term. So we're not, of course we have a deep red state legislature because of the gerrymandering, but we're a 40% minority state with 34% being African American. We're probably number 2 in the country for the concentration of African Americans. Most African Americans are concentrated here in the Deep South. So I think it is a huge misstep on the part of the DNC to ignore the South. Piece of your support is here. Yeah. I think the groundwork and the strategy must be to focus on these states in the South and to win them. Charles Booker was, and I use him because his primary has happened, but I think he should have been a model for what the DNC should be doing here in the South. But I think they believe that in order to win in the South, you have to have a conservative Democrat or a Trump-loving Democrat in order to be successful. And I reject that wholeheartedly. I know for a fact that that's not true. I think people are just apathetic. We're not a red state. We're a low voter turnout state because people have decided that the government doesn't work for them and that they'll never get a candidate that speaks for them. And the candidates that do speak for them don't get any elevation because there's no support. So
winning by the margin of despair.
Yeah. So, this is what we're confronted with here. But, nevertheless, we persist. What's the alternative? I mean, we can lay down and say, hey, it'll never happen. Or we can fight on and demand change and just keep pushing the envelope and keep trying to break through that glass ceiling. And that's what our campaign is determined to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially about how the DNC has kind of abandoned certain races and chose to embrace other candidates. We look at past races in 2018, and they really latched on to candidates like Stacey Abrams, as a model for how to win in the South, even though she actually didn't win, despite maybe rightfully should have winning. Yet we see them kind of totally abandoning candidates like Charles Booker, candidates like yourself, more progressive Democrats that really do have a different vision for the party, unlike a Stacey Abrams, who really is pretty in lockstep with the kind of corporate Democratic orthodoxy. Now, I looked at the senators that were from Louisiana, and I did notice that a lot of the past ones had been Democrats. I did not, however, see a lot of senators of color from Louisiana in the past. So I think
there's never been one.
Yeah, this race should, absolutely, in my opinion, be invested in by the DNC if they really claim to care about representation in their legislating body, as they often talk about. I'm really hoping that you get some resources in this race, because I agree it's an easily winnable one if they really invested in it and they really, employed a 50-state strategy, which I think they should.
Well, I think that just in Louisiana in general, there should be a pause for introspection. I mean, it's funny that you brought that up. We have never had an African American serve in the U.S. Senate here in Louisiana. There's only been 10 nationwide. 10 African Americans nationwide to serve in the U.S. Senate. We've never had a Black woman hold any federal office here or statewide office here. The last time a Black man held statewide office in Louisiana was over 150 years ago during Reconstruction. So, there's certainly a pause for introspection here in our state. I think that speaks to a lot of different underlying issues, a lot of issues that we're not going to fix this election cycle. But I think we have to continue on. We have no choice. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep elevating the issues. And like you said, I think this is an opportunity for the DNC to elevate, especially with the social injustices that are happening across this country. We saw what happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Walter Scott, Laquan McDonald, Alton Sterling. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on with the names, for hours. So we're seeing this being perpetuated almost on a daily basis. So this is an opportunity right now as we speak to elevate particularly African-American voices to speak to these issues and to speak to the policies that are going to adversely affect us or positively affect us, depending on who passes it. Because I saw the Republican bill, the Justice Act, or whatever they want to call it, the trash that they tried to put forward to placate people. And it's an insult. And even though they had Tim Scott, the lone Black Republican in the U.S. Senate, put it forward, I just felt like it was more of a dog and pony show than it was about having realistic change happen. So we need to be elevating African-American voices to speak to these issues, to speak to these disparities, because we're mostly subjected to it. And I just hope that the DNC won't miss this opportunity to step forward and really affect change. But, my optimism is it hasn't grown much, but I remain optimistic nonetheless.
I don't want to say it's been disheartening, because you would have to have expectations of the senior leadership in the Democratic Party to be let down by them. But it seems like they're only interested in performative change. They're prepared to parade around in African garb, but they're not prepared to enact change that's going to actually, save the lives of the Black men that are being killed by police single day. And they're prepared to stand idly by as people are, used chemical weaponry against them as they protest peacefully in the streets of their own country, demanding an equitable treatment under the law. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. If you were to, rise to the Senate and gain a national platform, I wonder what pushing you would want to see from the federal level, where most, police departments are run in a local municipality. So I understand there's limited things that you could do as a U.S. senator, but I just wonder if you arrive in office, what you would be pushing for and what kind of things you would be saying.
Well, that's absolutely right. The federal government does not run police departments, but we can change some of the existing laws to protect the lives, particularly of African Americans across this country. One of the main things that I think we should focus on is repealing qualified immunity. We have to do that, because what it does is it says that police officers are doing their job in good faith. And we know if we just watch the video evidence that's pouring in across the country, we know that we can't trust them to do that. And this does not speak to every single police officer, and that should go without saying. But I think it also should go without saying that not all Black people are bad either. But we do know that, there's this sort of stigma, particularly in poor communities, about we know that the policing is different in poor communities. We know that in most cases they're over-policed to a large degree. So qualified immunity would put police officers on the same playing field as the members of the community. It would take away this sort of veil that says that they've done their job in good faith, even though they're killing people that are unarmed. We need to be able to sue them and have them be responsible and not the taxpayers. So I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to move those type of policies forward. But I think that should be the sole concentration, at least one thing that Congress should fight to push for. And I did see that the House, I believe they actually passed that bill. It's a sweeping piece of legislation that gets rid of chokeholds and gets rid of no-knock warrants. These are the types of things that we have to be pushing for, and that I would support too on the Senate side. If that bill that the House passed, I can't think of the name of the bill, but it's a sweeping piece of legislation that does a whole lot. It disincentivizes mistreatment of people by law enforcement. I would vote yay on that bill in a heartbeat, because this is the type of sweeping legislation that we have to move forward in this country.
Yeah, I believe I think I saw that Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and maybe Ed Markey introduced a bill yesterday to end qualified immunity. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that. I didn't hear that one.
Yeah, I think that was just introduced. I'm sure it obviously won't pass in the Senate as it is now, but hopefully that legislation is still around when you get there, if you do.
Yeah, they're trying to weaken every piece of because I think the House bill did pass in the U.S. Senate, and I think that, of course, they're going to try to weaken it. They're going to try to water it down, dilute it, take out anything that holds police officers accountable, which kind of, defeats the purpose. I also think we need to dilute these police unions. Isn't it amazing that the Republican Party wants to bust up every union except the police union.
Yeah, it's insanity.
I think that's incredible. So we definitely need to be looking at that particular union, because I see it as a stronghold for police officers to get out there and do things that are not right, and not be held accountable, or perhaps get back out there and get their jobs back and get back out on the streets to hurt more people. Because all the officers, most of the officers, if not all of them, that have been involved in these sorts of tragedies have had multiple accounts, multiple complaints against them, multiple disciplinary actions against them for similar things, and ultimately they kill someone. And
with
then
Derek Chauvin, it was over a dozen.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I think there were 18 against him.
Astronomical amount. No discipline ever taken.
Right. The guy the Asian guy that was with him, I think he had several lawsuits against him that were paid out by the city, right back out there on the beat. So, these types of things we we should be making their records transparent, because that's what they do with the deceased. When they kill, what do? They pull up everything you've ever done in your entire life. So we need that same type of transparency when it comes down to law enforcement. I think when the more of the veil we take down, the more likely people are to do what's right. Of course, we need to be enforcing body cameras and things like that. So there's a lot that you can do on the federal. You can't tell municipalities how to run their but you can disincentivize wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do.
One other thing that we wanted to ask you about, you're running, like you said, in the South. The South has been absolutely devastated by the impact of the coronavirus, both from a social well-being standpoint, as far as community health is concerned, and as also economically speaking. And as we reach the month of July, it looks like the Senate is not interested in passing any form of extended benefits in the form of unemployment increases or any sort of moratorium on eviction. So people are really being left hung out to dry as the country's economy tanks, as people try and stay safe, as they try and grieve the losses of their loved ones. I just wondered if you could speak to how the inadequacy of the response of our current Congress is reflected in your state and in your community.
Well, I think it speaks to how clearly tone deaf our Congress is. And that again is why I'm running. We have people that have no concept of what it's like to be poor and without insurance. I mean, because they have to consider who's paying for their insurance. Who pays for Congress to have the best insurance in the country, have the best health care? We do. But they want to look at us and say, oh, pull yourselves up. It's utterly ridiculous. They're just completely out of touch, completely tone deaf. Like you said, I was looking at the numbers here in Louisiana. We have over 3,000 dead. I think, I don't want to overshoot it, maybe over 50,000 cases somewhere over there, somewhere in that. I mean, it's just, it's ridiculous, a ridiculous number. And we have so many people that are uninsured or underinsured that won't be able to go and get see a doctor, that won't be able to afford to pay for the test, because as you know, Donald Trump is rolling back federal funding for testing because he, quote unquote, wants to slow down the test. He wasn't joking about that. He's actually doing it in policy. So we have a lot of people that will have symptoms or maybe be asymptomatic that won't be tested. So we're going to consistently see, and Louisiana is a communal state. And when I say that, I mean, every festival you can think of, party you can think of, every reason to get together that you can think of. We're a food heavy state. I mean, whatever it is, we're very communal. So we're going to see a massive devastation. We were already seeing across the South several states close back down that opened up too soon and did not have there. Of course, there's no vaccine. They're not taking proper precautions to wear masks. I mean, so the disinformation coming from the president, combined with the lack of action, combined with the inaction from Congress, is going to be devastating here on the South, where people are poor, people live in. People are relying on public transportation. People are living in extended families, are living in close-knit communities. Many people living together in the same houses. So there's a lot of things that will exacerbate the issue, particularly poverty, and the things that are attributed to poverty. But I think we have to have people that have an ear to the ground and understand how these things affect the outcomes, and are able to speak to that, like mandatory masks, or, it's more particularly in public places. making sure that people wear masks in public places. So the mayor of East Baton Rouge Parish, we have parishes here, other states have counties. But the mayor here of our parish and several other parishes across the state are making, and the governor, I believe, has mandated masks, but you can't enforce it. There's no way to really enforce it unless the private companies that have, for example, like the grocery stores. Of course, that's a privately owned business, but it's open to the public. Unless they enforce it and say you can't enter our establishment unless you're wearing a mask, there's really no way to enforce that. So I think we have to have that type of collective response, and we have to have people that are willing to get on board with those type of collective responses in order to really do something about it. Congress has lost their way as a collective. The House is doing an okay job in most areas, but I think when it comes to that Senate side, there's probably little hope in the country for effective change.
It just speaks volumes to how desperately we needed a fresh voice and a fighter's perspective like Charles Booker to come in, oust Mitch McConnell. I don't know that McGrath has what it takes to unseat a guy like Mitch McConnell, but I knew for a fact that Charles Booker did, because he was going to ignite an entirely new base of voters for the Democratic Party. It's foolish. It just shows, it almost makes me feel like they don't want to win. Because they would rather, it's like they would rather have Charles Booker lose than have him actually start, speaking as the new face of a party, which he would surely join the ranks of an AOC or a Bernie Sanders as one of the more popular faces of the Democratic Party.
I think the biggest change of establishment politics here in our state and across the country is that it's going to happen without them. So they no longer have that stranglehold over this, they can't decide what the status quo is. They can't control politics anymore. And I think that is their biggest fear. I think their biggest fear is that they no longer can control the masses through they can't control the elected officials, and therefore they can't control the masses. So Charles Booker raised maybe $3 million, somewhere around there. Amy McGrath raised $41 million with the help of the DNC.
98% out of state from Kentucky. Right.
So then how do you make a campaign like that successful against Mitch McConnell? I just don't see it. This is why the national Democratic apparatus have to invest in campaigns like ours. They have to see the value of grassroots, campaigns that are actually in touch with the needs of the people, because that's how you win over the country. If people see you making an investment in candidates that are actually trying to affect change that speak to their issues and not the issues of the corporations, then people are more likely to get involved. But I think that's also what they fear, because the more people you have involved, the less likely you can corrupt the system. So,
and one issue that I'm sure you're very familiar with in Louisiana that is a prime example of what we're talking about is climate change. It's something that the Democrats like to pay lip service to. I mean, obviously, it's something that the Republicans don't even believe in at all. But in Louisiana, I've heard that, people do know that climate change is real, especially those living in New Orleans, other areas on the coast, which are pretty much battered on a yearly basis now by floods, tropical storms, hurricanes. Can you speak a little bit about how the impending reality of climate change has affected you and the people you know as a native Louisianan?
Absolutely. Everyone who lives in Louisiana knows the situation in New Orleans. So, of course, Louisiana, due to climate change, the rise in sea levels, Louisiana loses about a football field size of coast an hour.
Damn.
So if you look at the maps of Louisiana, those old maps, Louisiana doesn't look like that anymore on our coast. It's highly eroded. As a matter of fact, Louisiana was one of the first states in the country, if not the only states in the country, that has had to resettle Native Americans, indigenous people, inward because their lands are all gone. They lived in a place called Ile de Jean, St. Charles. It's an island right off the coast, right close to the coast of Louisiana. Gone. It'll never be back. All their native land, their farmland, they're all resettled now. It was actually 2 tribes down in that area, all of which are going to be resettled because their land is gone forever due to climate change. So we know that it's a reality. We know that this is happening, and we just have to have the political courage to speak to it, to start moving to renewable energy, to start moving away from what we know leaves a carbon footprint. But that takes not only an acceptance of the science of climate change, but it also takes political will, especially when the industries that are benefiting from, or that are not as impacted by climate change are making millions and millions and perhaps billions of dollars, and they're able to make investments in our elected officials. I say this all the time. If you own the referees, you never lose a game. The fossil fuel industry owns the referees. So of course they're not going to have the political will to pass legislation that addresses climate change. So we have to have people that have the courage to accept the science of climate change, but also to do something about it, to start moving us towards renewable energy, to start moving us like Texas with windmills. We can put them out in the Gulf. We have oil rigs out there. So certainly we can start doing things to help us get rid of our carbon footprint and save our state from sinking into the ocean. So I stand on the side of addressing climate change. We need to have something as aggressive as a Green New Deal. And of course, people may look at the Green New Deal as aspirational because of the things that it entails, but we need something that addresses climate change as aggressively as the Green New Deal does. For sure.
Well, for people who want to support your campaign and make sure that more voices like yours get heard on a national level and help you, succeed in your bid for the Senate, where can people go to support you?
They can go to my website, www.AntoinePierce.com. AntoinePierce.com, or you can follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook under Antoine Pierce, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. Basically every social media platform under my name. You can search me there, or go to my website at AntoinePierce.com and show us some support.
Well, we definitely look forward to seeing how your campaign pans out, and we wish you the best of luck. Thank you so much.
We're hoping that he also gets in and helps you out.
I hope so too. All the progressive organizations too, the Young Turks and others. I hope they step up and show us some love, man. Some national media outlets too.
It's a race to watch for sure. I agree. I don't think there's any reason to write it off.
Yeah, we wish you the best of luck, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.